Caleb and I came out of the dark woods breathing hard. I'd never been so scared in all my 13 years. I just watched one of my friends die a horrible death, and if we weren't careful, Caleb and I would be next. We moved through the Henderson family's backyard and stopped at the front corner of the house. Then we peered down the street, looking for any sign of the truck from the construction site. My house was across the street and one house down from the Hendersons' place. Everything looked normal over there. When it looked like the coast was clear, we darted toward the street. Just as our shoes touched asphalt, headlights erupted from a pool of shadows under a tree 2 houses down from mine. Tires squealed as the headlights lurched toward us.
It's him!
I screamed. The truck bore down on us as we ran into my front yard. It jumped the curb behind us and crashed into the porch steps just seconds after Caleb and I threw ourselves onto the porch. My front door was locked, so I banged on it, shouting to be let in. Behind us, just beyond the now smashed wooden porch steps, the truck door opened. I glanced over my shoulder, still banging on the door, and saw that the huge, muscular man was now wearing a threadbare black ski mask. He had a long, flathead screwdriver in one hand.
Dad!
I screamed, banging on the door.
Let us in!
I could sense the man approaching behind us. We were trapped. Birds chirped in the trees, and a squirrel darted across the grass as I walked down the street in the late afternoon sunlight. I could hear the annoying little Thurman kids screaming and laughing as they jumped on their trampoline in their backyard. I wanted to get my friend Caleb and get gone before any of them spotted me and asked to play. They were spoiled and couldn't take no for an answer. Besides, what teenager ever wants to hang out with a bunch of 9 and 10-year-olds? As I stepped onto the walkway to my friend's front door, the sound of Caleb's father yelling stopped me in my tracks. Beyond Caleb's house, which was situated at the end of our cul-de-sac, was a tall wall separating the neighborhood from the freeway. As I froze there on the walkway, I could hear cars whooshing past in both directions. It was rush hour, and I couldn't fathom how many people were passing so close to that miserable house, not having any idea what was happening to the innocent 14-year-old in there. As if he was trying to let all those strangers know what was happening, Caleb screamed out in pain from inside the house. The sound made my entire body tense up. I had told my mom and dad about what I thought went on at Caleb's house, although Caleb had never talked about it. They wondered if I'd actually seen my friend being abused, but I hadn't. They said they would discuss calling CPS, but that it was a big deal and shouldn't be done lightly. To my knowledge, they never did. Even at 13, I knew that separating a kid from his only parent was a big deal, even if that parent was abusive. But as I stood on that walkway and listened to my friend scream out in pain, I thought it would have to be done sooner or later. Forcing myself to move up the cluttered porch, I tried to scrounge some courage as I raised my hand and placed my finger over the doorbell. There was a thud and a clatter from inside, and I heard Caleb suck in a ragged breath, as though he'd been hit in the sternum. I rang the doorbell.
Mother
Caleb's dad yelled.
Answer the f***ing door, you little p***y!
My friend sobbed as he came toward the door. I heard him stop on the other side.
Who is it?
He asked. He wasn't tall enough to look through the peephole.
It's Nico,
I said.
Oh, okay. Hold on, Nico.
When my friend opened the door a few moments later, his cheeks were dry but almost as red as his eyes from where he'd rubbed the tears away.
Hey,
I said.
hey.
Want to go meet the guys at the construction site? I whispered. Caleb glanced back over his shoulder. When he turned back to me, he wore a look of determination.
Yeah.
He said, stepping out.
let's go.
I hesitated. Shouldn't you ask your dad? Caleb shut the door.
Him, let's go.
There wasn't much I could say to that, so I followed him down the porch steps. We cut through the Hendersons' yard and hustled into the half-mile stretch of woods between our housing development and the one that was being constructed. We walked in silence. Even though I wanted to ask how he was doing, I didn't. I'd learned that Caleb needed time to get his head right after having a fight with his father. Although I guessed fight wasn't really the right word. Beating was probably more accurate. Not for the first time, I wondered what his back and chest looked like under his shirt. I figured if there were bruises and scars, that's where they would be. We found Cruz and Bowen in the makeshift fort we'd constructed out of some warped and moldy plywood boards we'd found in the woods. There was a hole pointed toward the half-built housing development, so we could look out and make sure all the workers had left for the day. That's what Cruz and Bowen were doing when we got there. After exchanging our greetings, Caleb asked if the coast was clear.
Roger that.
Bowen said.
No movement.
Let's go.
Cruz said, shoving past Caleb and me as he crawled out of the little fort. We ventured down the gentle hill and into the construction site. There were 6 houses in the process of being built, all of them around a cul-de-sac, much like the one Caleb and I lived on. Pallets of building materials sat around the wooden structures, along with piles of dirt and long dumpsters half full of construction-related garbage. Further on, past the houses, there were earth movers and dump trucks and other equipment used to clear land for more houses. The streets had already been put in, so you could see the layout of the neighborhood. It was a 13-year-old's playground, and what made it even more enticing was the fact that we weren't supposed to be there. The sun was beginning to set as we started into the first house, exploring, noting all that had been done since our last visit on the previous Friday, exactly a week ago. We chatted excitedly about what the houses would look like when they were finished, and we discussed the things that were important to us: girls, games, movies, and sports. Caleb was mostly silent, but he joined in from time to time. It was plain to see he didn't have the carefree attitude that we 3 did. And with good reason, I thought. When we had moved on to the second house in line, I approached him as he looked out a glassless window at the encroaching night. "You want to spend the night at my house tonight?" I asked. Still looking out the window, Caleb nodded. "I'll have to ask when I get home, but I'm sure my parents will be fine with it." Caleb nodded again. Then his head turned as a vehicle pulled into the mouth of the cul-de-sac.
Car!
He said, grabbing me and pulling me back from the window. Cruz and Bowen were downstairs horsing around. They hadn't seen the vehicle, so we bolted down the stairs.
Someone's coming!
I shouted, getting their attention. We all ran into what would eventually be the living room and ducked down below a glassless picture window. With my heart racing, I peeked up above the threshold with the others, watching the dark-colored truck as it rolled slowly down the street, creaking and rattling. Its headlights were off, despite the increasing darkness. I couldn't see anything but a man-shaped figure in the driver's seat. The bed of the truck was stacked with what looked to be trash: broken lawn chairs, an old dishwasher, and a roll of old carpet, among many other items. The truck stopped at the end of the street in front of the house next to the one we were in. By looking to our right, out the window, we could see the truck. It idled for a long moment before the reverse lights came on. I realized then that it didn't have a license plate on the back. I'd been feeling a ball of nervous excitement in my stomach, but when I noticed the lack of a license plate, a little fear seeped in. The truck turned around and backed up to the front of the home's property line, allowing me to see that there was no license plate on the front either. There was no driveway yet, not for any of the houses, and I assumed the driveways were one of the last things they did. The truck's engine stopped and the door opened. A large man stepped out, wearing a dark baseball cap pulled low. His eyes were nothing but dark holes under the cap's brim, but I could see his knobby nose and his pursed lips. A smattering of facial hair covered his cheeks and chin. He wore a black, cut-off t-shirt and dirty carpenter's pants. His arms bulged with muscles, and to my 13-year-old mind, he looked like a giant, even from this distance. He tracked to the back of the truck and pulled a shovel out from amid the junk in the bed. More fear seeped into my stomach. "What is he doing?" Bowen asked in a whisper. None of us answered. Our eyes were fixed on him as he walked onto the dirt where the driveway would eventually be. He started digging. "He's about to bury a body," Caleb said. "You're right," Cruz said. "He's probably just a construction worker who's working late." "In the dark?" I said. "By himself?" "We should go," Bowen said. "No way," Cruz said. "He'll hear us." "I thought he was just a construction worker," Caleb said. "Well, either way, we're not supposed to be here," Cruz replied. We all fell silent again. No one made a move. We simply watched the man dig. And it soon became apparent, even as full dark descended, that he was digging a body-sized hole.
Maybe we should call 911,
Bowen said.
No,
Caleb said.
my dad will kill me if he finds out I've been here.
When the man was done digging, he jammed the shovel into the ground next to the hole and strolled back over to the truck bed. He pulled some of the junk out, removing the roll of carpet last and dumping it on the ground next to the truck. Then he reached into the bed and pulled something out that was taped up in black trash bags. He pulled half the thing out and let it dangle over the tailgate before hefting the rest of it up onto his shoulder. My heart sank. It was a body. There was no doubt about it. I felt sick.
Oh my God,
Cruz said.
it really is a body. That's a murderer.
Shh, Caleb said. Cruz crawled backward from the window.
I gotta go home. I can't be here. I'm gonna go. Cruz, just stop for a second,
I said. It was so dark in the house now, it was hard to see anything more than shadowy shapes. But I knew there had been a couple of sawhorses with a 2x4 across them somewhere in the living room. Cruz stood up, still backing away from the window.
You guys should come. Cruz, stop moving,
Caleb hissed. Then Cruz hit one of the sawhorses, and the piece of wood clattered to the floor. We all froze for a long moment. The three of us were looking toward Cruz, away from the window. And when I finally turned my head back to the window and looked out at the truck, my heart seized in my chest. He's gone, I said. The truck was still there. The shovel stood upright next to the grave. The bag-shrouded body lay unmoving between the truck and hole. But the man was gone.
Oh,
Caleb said.
Run!
We scrambled up and ran to the back of the house. Cruz had a head start, and he made it to the doorless back door first. As he crossed the threshold, a hand shot out and gripped him by the neck. The rest of us skidded to a stop as the man stepped into view, holding our friend up like he weighed nothing more than a basketball.
Come here.
He said to us, voice low and scratchy. We backed away.
Come here or your friend dies.
Cruz was crying, hanging limply in the man's grasp. We continued backing up. The man roared and slammed Cruz into the concrete steps leading from the back door. I heard my friend's bones crunch with the impact. Bowen screamed as the three of us turned to run. We could hear the man's heavy footfalls banging through the house after us. Caleb and I had the same idea, both of us going for the picture window to jump out into the night. Bowen broke off, heading for the front door. The man went after Bowen, while Caleb and I jumped out the picture window and then took off toward the next house in line, away from the end of the cul-de-sac. We ducked around the next house and then sprinted as fast as we could toward the woods leading back to our neighborhood. When we reached the tree line, we slid down under a bush and looked back at the housing development. There was no sign of the man, no sign of Bowen either. I pulled my phone out and dialed 911. Caleb didn't discourage me.
911, what is your current location?
A female operator said.
I don't know.
I said.
There's no addresses here. It's just a construction site.
Do you know the nearest address?
I gave her my home address.
But that's my house, and it's across the woods from where I am.
Okay, what is your emergency?
There's a man here. He killed one of my friends. He was burying a body and we saw him.
Do you have a description of the man?
The female operator asked. I gave her a quick description.
And do you know where he is right now? Are you still at the construction site?
We don't know where he is. We're in the woods next to the site.
Okay, can you get home to the address you gave me? I'm going to send a patrol car there. Do you think you can do that?
Yes, I think so.
Okay, if you see the man again, I want you to hide. And if you can't hide, I want you to run.
Okay.
I said.
Good. I'm going to stay on the line with you until you get home safely, okay?
Okay.
Are your parents home?
Yes.
Good. Go as soon as you can.
She wants us to go home.
I said to Caleb, phone still to my ear. Caleb nodded. We backed away from the bush and crept away from the tree line, listening for any nearby movement. Before we had moved more than a few yards, I heard the roar of an engine coming to life. Stopping, I looked back over my shoulder, although there was no way I could see the truck from where we were in the woods. Still, I was sure it was the man leaving.
Should we go back and look for Bowen?
I whispered.
What if he's not leaving?
Caleb asked.
What if he's going to our neighborhood to head us off?
The notion hadn't occurred to me. I just thought he was leaving, running away. But when Caleb said it, I realized he could be right. The engine noise faded as the truck sped out of the neighborhood.
What's going on?
The 911 operator asked.
Is he leaving?
He might be going to our house,
I said.
I don't think that's likely.
The woman said.
He's probably fleeing the scene, knowing the police are on the way. How fast can you get home?
I don't know. 10 minutes?
Okay, go.
Caleb didn't have a cell phone, so I told the lady I was going to have to put her on speaker so I could use the flashlight to navigate the woods. Once I had the light on, Caleb and I moved as fast as we could through the woods toward our neighborhood. When we got to the Henderson property, I shut the flashlight off and we crept toward the side of the house.
Are you going home or coming with me?
I asked Caleb.
Coming with you.
At the corner of the Henderson house, we peered down the street, looking for any sign of the truck. When it looked like the coast was clear, we darted toward the street. Just as our shoes touched asphalt, headlights erupted from a pool of shadows under a tree 2 houses down from mine. Tires squealed as the headlights lurched toward us.
It's him!
I screamed. The truck bore down on us as we ran into my front yard. It jumped the curb behind us and crashed into the porch steps just a second after Caleb and I threw ourselves onto the porch. My front door was locked, so I banged on it, shouting to be let in. Behind us, just beyond the now smashed wooden porch steps, the truck door opened. I glanced over my shoulder, still banging on the door, and saw that the man was now wearing a threadbare black ski mask. He had a long flathead screwdriver in one hand.
Dad!
I screamed, banging on the door.
Let us in!
I could sense the man approaching behind us. We were trapped. The deadbolt and my front door clicked back, and the door flew open. Caleb and I tumbled inside at my father's feet.
Jesus Christ!
My dad said, looking into the front yard.
Shut the door!
I yelled, looking outside to see no sign of the man, only his truck and the smashed porch steps.
What happened?
Caleb and I got to our feet, and I yanked the door out of my dad's hand, slamming it shut and locking it.
Are you safe?
The woman on the phone asked.
Who's that?
My dad asked.
We're at the address I gave you, but the man is here.
I said to her, ignoring my dad's question.
Okay, is that your father? Let me talk to him.
I thrusted the phone at my dad.
Here, there's a man after us. We need to lock all the doors.
My dad took the phone dumbly. Caleb and I ran off to secure the house. I checked the back door first, finding it locked. Caleb checked all the windows. When we met at the stairs, I asked him if he'd seen the man outside. Caleb shook his head.
Let's make sure all the upstairs windows are locked too,
I said. We raced up the stairs and checked the windows. We stopped in my bedroom and looked out onto the front yard as the police pulled up. The truck was still there, and they pulled into our yard to park behind it. The 2 officers, one male and one female, got out and drew their weapons. The woman approached the truck, while the man scanned the area around the front of the house. I saw the woman's face go pale when she looked into the truck cab. She opened the door and reached inside. A moment later, she stepped back.
Gibson, we got a dead kid in here.
She called out to her partner. Caleb and I shared a look. We knew she was talking about Bowen.
Let's take a look around before we secure the family.
Gibson said. Then he called out.
Mr. West, are you in there? Yes.
My dad called out from downstairs.
We're here. Okay, keep everything locked up tight until we come back. Okay.
The 2 officers started around the side of my house together.
Nico?
My dad called.
Where are you?
Upstairs,
I called.
with Caleb.
You 2 stay up there, okay?
Where's Mom?
I shouted.
She went to the store. I'm calling her right now to tell her what's going on.
Caleb and I moved from room to room, following the progress of the police as they rounded the house into the backyard. Our yard was pretty big, and it had a large shed set a good 30 yards from the house. Both officers moved toward it, flashlights shining and guns drawn. We watched them go, barely breathing, terrified but excited because we knew the police would triumph. The doorbell rang downstairs, pulling our attention from the real-life police drama playing out before us.
You think it's him?
Caleb asked. I said nothing. I just listened. After a moment, I heard my dad open the door and greet someone. Then I heard another male voice.
It's my dad,
Caleb said blankly. There was a shout from the backyard, followed by a thud. We whipped our heads toward the now open shed, just in time to see the man in the ski mask pulling a screwdriver out of the female cop's throat. She dropped to her knees just inside the shed door, then fell over as blood pumped out of her. The male cop was crawling on the ground away from the shed, his right eyeball hanging out. He was making a groaning sound, like a low scream. The man in the mask stepped casually over to the cop and stabbed the screwdriver down through the back of the cop's neck. The tip of it busted out of his throat and embedded itself in the ground. The man left it in the cop's neck while he stepped over and picked up a gun from the ground. He checked the chamber and then stuffed it in his back waistband. Then he pulled the screwdriver out of the cop's neck and looked up at Caleb and me. We dropped out of sight. I shook with fear as I crawled toward the door, thinking I had to warn my dad as soon as possible. Once out of view of the window, I got up and ran downstairs to find my dad and Caleb's dad in deep conversation at the front door.
He killed him!
I cried.
He killed the cops, and now he's coming for us!
The two fathers looked at each other and then back at me.
Are you sure?
Yes!
I said.
Caleb and I just saw it.
Suddenly, I realized Caleb wasn't with me.
Where is he?
Caleb's dad, whose name was Colin, asked.
He was in the backyard.
I said.
But
The sound of glass breaking interrupted my words. It was coming from the back of the house.
Let's go now.
My dad said, holding out his hand for me.
Where's my son?
Colin boomed.
he was just upstairs with me.
I said.
I don't know why he didn't.
Nico, come on.
My dad surged forward and yanked me toward the front door by my arm, while Colin bolted up the stairs. As my dad dragged me around the truck, I forced myself not to look inside. I didn't want to see what the man had done to Bowen after my friend had told him where we lived. We made it to the opposite sidewalk when a commotion from inside our house stopped us. We turned and looked toward my bedroom window, which was at the front of the house on the second floor. We could see two silhouettes fighting in there. There was a crash as one of them was thrown into my bedside lamp. Another, lower crash sounded as they broke through my closet doors. Then the window shattered as Colin's body soared out. He bounced off the roof and fell down to the driveway, landing on his head with a crunch.
Caleb!
I shouted, yanking my arm out of my dad's grasp.
Nico!
My dad screamed, starting after me, but I was already halfway to the front door. To this day, I don't know what I was thinking, other than that I'd already lost too many friends that night. Despite my utter, implacable fear, I knew I had to do something to try and save him. I bolted through the open front door and up the stairs without so much as a half-assed plan in my head. It was only when I turned into my room and saw the destruction from the fight that I paused to consider my actions. Suddenly looking around for a weapon, I was reminded of how easily the man had dispatched not just Cruz, but also the two police officers and Caleb's dad. What chance did a 13-year-old have? I moved to my dresser and opened the top drawer, grabbing my pocket knife out. I unfolded the blade and then turned around. The masked man loomed over me. He slapped the pocket knife away and lifted me by the neck with one hand. With his other hand, he brought the bloody flathead screwdriver up and pressed it into my stomach. Not enough to break the skin, but enough to hurt. Enough to feel the power and know that he could easily skewer me with it.
You should have listened to your daddy, boy.
He said, grinning behind the mask. He slammed me against the wall next to the window. The muscles of his right arm rippled as he prepared to impale me with the long screwdriver. Then there was a muffled gunshot, followed quickly by a second. The masked man stopped grinning and dropped me to the floor. He stumbled back, and as he did, Caleb stepped out of the way, holding the pistol that had moments earlier been in the man's waistband. The guy dropped the screwdriver as he tried to turn for the door. His feet tangled, and he fell to his chest, revealing the 2 gunshot wounds in his lower back. Caleb and I stood in my half-smashed room, staring down at the man until he stopped moving. I heard thumping from downstairs. A moment later, my dad called up, his voice shrill with fear.
Nico! I'm okay, Dad.
I shouted.
We're okay. He's dead.
I heard my dad running up the stairs. A moment later, he appeared in the hallway outside my bedroom door. The dead man had fallen near the door, so Caleb and I would have to step over him to leave. My dad stared down at the man for a long time. Then he gestured for us to come out.
Caleb, you first. I want you to take the gun by its barrel and hand it to me, butt first, okay?
Caleb nodded and adjusted the gun like my dad asked. He stepped over the man's outstretched right arm toward the door, proffering the gun toward my dad. The dead man moved. He whipped his arm up, yanking the gun out of Caleb's hand and batting my friend aside in one swift gesture. Before I knew what was happening, the man was on his knees, pointing the gun at my dad, who was frozen in the hallway. I yelled and threw myself onto the man's bloody back, batting at his arm just as he fired. The bullet blasted into the wall right next to my father. Shouting, the man reached over his head for me with his left arm. My dad barreled forward and crashed into the man. The impact jarred me loose and threw me into the side of my bed. The killer and my dad were wrestling for the gun as I got to my hands and knees. The killer was on his back, my dad crouching over him. But the killer was much stronger. My dad fought him, but the man was getting the gun closer and closer to my father's head. Caleb appeared, grabbing the man's arm and yanking it away from my dad. It worked for a moment, but I could see it wouldn't last for long. The man was just too strong. I looked around frantically, seeing my pocket knife on the floor by my closet. I grabbed the knife and lunged for the man. In a frenzy, I stabbed at his face and throat with the stubby knife, thinking about Bowen and Cruz. I stabbed and stabbed until I heard my father's voice.
It's over,
He said, putting a hand on my shoulder.
it's over, Nico. You got him.
Caleb looked at me and nodded.
He's really dead this time.
I suddenly realized my arm was tired, and I looked down to see that the man's face was nothing but a mess of slashed fabric and bloody flesh. I dropped the knife and stood up. I walked downstairs with my father and my best friend. 10 minutes later, Caleb and I were being checked out by paramedics as we sat in the back of an ambulance. We'd been silent ever since leaving the house, but Caleb suddenly spoke. "He killed my dad," he said. "I know," I said. I stopped. I was about to say I was sorry, but Caleb's tone registered with me before I could. It wasn't a happy tone, not really, but it also wasn't a sad one. I couldn't place it at the time. Only now, years later, do I realize what he sounded like. As he said those 4 words, he spoke with the tone of a person experiencing freedom for the first time. Believe it or not, my parents took Caleb in after that. It was a lengthy process, but they managed it. After all, Caleb had no other family, at least none that was fit to take him in. So my best friend essentially became my brother, and it was amazing to see him flourish under our roof. We grew closer over the years, and to this day, we remain as close as brothers. Thanks for watching. Be sure to subscribe and smash that like button to get notified every time I upload a new video. You can also check out some more of my animated horror stories right here.